Hello and welcome to Exceptional TV. My name is Judd Smith, and today we're continuing to explore the lives and the work of thought leaders, of innovators and visionary change makers. Now today we're going to explore something that's actually pretty familiar to all of us, but we are going to go a little deeper and look under the hood, if you will. And that familiar human experience, increasingly, sadly, familiar, is stress. And to take this deeper dive into how we can live with this stuff and what it is and a little bit more about it and some of the ways that perhaps we can really get on top of it and master it, I have here with me Susi Vine. So I would like to introduce, let me get Susi onto the screen with us so that we can see what is going on. Good morning, Susi. How are you? Welcome to Exceptional TV.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Susi, I know that in the world today, even just a couple of years ago, end of 2018, and this is an old statistic, I'm sorry, it's just one that popped into my head, that 57% of techs are not just stressed, but burned out. Now our world, even since 2018, have become increasingly more oriented towards technology. Think of COVID for a moment, where everybody has moved online in extraordinary ways. Not everybody, and still there are people in the fields working the crops and doing the work on the roads and many other situations. But now there are these added dimensions of, well, we've got to wear masks. Do I know if this person's got COVID? Are they not got COVID, but they don't know that they're passing out? I mean, all kinds of stresses, just increased levels that have come to us. So I just wanted to, I guess if you were, set the scene and make sure that if people didn't already know that stress is something common to us all, I just add those pieces in. But Susi, before we get into the what and how of stress, I'd like to hear a little bit about you, your story. Where are you? How did you get to be where you are? And I'll dig into each of these pieces as we get going. But yeah, tell me about yourself, Susi.
Thank you. I've led kind of a winding path. I like to think concentric circles. In San Diego now, but I was raised in the Heartland. I was raised in a village in central Illinois. So when you mention, people working out in the farms, everyone encounters stress where they are. And it's certainly something I was familiar with even early on. My mother was a nurse. She's retired now, worked for 40 years in labor and delivery during the night shift. And so I was able to see firsthand how that adds up over the years, and really the end result, she's doing very well, but to see the chronic issues that she has navigated herself. And then through other work that I've done over the years, I've worked in technical theater, I've worked in helping people move from their homes, downsizing and decluttering. And so I've seen a lot of interesting perspectives in terms of how people live and relate in their environments.
Yeah, so so that was something that you saw even as a child. Was there one almost defining moment where you decided to work, and focus your life around this issue, at least for now? Because usually you probably didn't grow up thinking, oh, when I grow up, I want to work on stress.
I just want to help people calm down. Maybe I did, but I didn't have that realization. No, it was actually, so when I was working as a move manager, my clients were all in their 80s and 90s. Our company specifically supported seniors. And so when I saw the reasons that they were making those moves, And almost without exception, they did not want to be making these moves. But
Right.
because of health issues, losing their independence, or losing a spouse and
Right.
needing more support, they needed to downsize to move into perhaps a retirement community, which in Southern California is pretty close to resort living. But when you don't want to make a move,
You
it
don't
doesn't
want it.
matter
Yeah.
how good
Yeah.
that situation is going to be. You're miserable about it. And selfishly, after helping hundreds of people and couples make these transitions, I recognize that we want to have a lot more in terms of choices when we get to that point. We
Right.
want to live with vitality, have the activity level that we choose to have, and all of these things really start way upstream. And that's the kind of epiphany moment, that these lifestyle choices that we get to make pretty easily when we're younger really lead us to that end destination. And so that's when I got passionate about helping myself, helping everybody else at this stage where we are before we've got those chronic health issues. And stress is such a common denominator. And so that's really the point at which I chose to start the conversation.
So your focus is, as you put it, upstream. Now, the reality of the human being a lot of the time is, and of course, I'm not speaking from personal experience or anything, but we tend to make decisions when we have to rather than in advance and proactively, and when we could, but it's not really clear that we should. So what challenges do you face in dealing with helping people make changes upstream?
Yes, that is exactly the situation. We don't like change. We don't like things that make us uncomfortable, and it's hard to work outside of our comfort zone. So, knowing we could eat a better diet, but it's not convenient to learn the new recipes to change our habits of shopping. Knowing that we could be more active if we tend to be pretty sedentary, and given that we spend a third of our lives at work, if we're lucky, if we're keeping good boundaries, only 8 hours a day at work, breaking out of that inertia and bringing in movement is really hard for a lot of people. So unfortunately, a lot of times it comes with a diagnosis. You're pre-diabetic or you have cardiovascular disease, and hopefully, because even then it's not enough for a person to get motivated themselves, hopefully there's a
Right.
spouse or partner or family to pull them along and help them move into that change. So it really comes down to connecting with the reason behind it. Willpower only takes us so far, but when we have a real reason to inspire ourselves. So personally, I recognize that I want to age better than my parents. I don't want to be suffering from arthritis and autoimmune issues starting now. I mean, my mom was really having these issues by the time she was in her 40s, even earlier. So that is my spark, and that's something that I try to kind of turn a light bulb on and let people know that, perhaps if there's not enough reason for yourself or family to motivate you, take a look around and really get clear on the picture of what your future could look like if you just think it's fine to maintain the status quo and wait until you really need to make a change. It's a lot easier to make small course corrections than to make a really big pivot.
Right. So when you say small course corrections, what are you talking about here?
Well, so I mentioned food is so important. I mean, we really are what we eat, whether that be the nutrients or whether that be the culinary chemicals that they're adding into food. One of the aspects that I focus on with the people that I work with is helping them recognize how much our environment adds to our stress. Um, and so if you think about the amount of stress we carry around as a bucket, the little things that we don't notice, that we stop recognizing that we're carrying, like perhaps air quality, which cleaning chemicals in our homes really bring down the quality of air in our home. The EPA has recognized this as a major health concern. So if you just don't think about it, you like the scent of the air freshener and you keep on using it, that's taking up some of your body's capacity to handle stress, so that when stress does comes along, it's much easier for it to tip the scales. So diet and movement, as I mentioned, cleaning up our home so that it's a healing space is another big factor. And then mindset is huge, especially this year. This is where I've really turned my attention in terms of changing the way that we perceive stress so that we can be more empowered.
Right, because it's. I think the point that you made about many times our focus on this area of our life is triggered by some kind of a diagnosis. We are more likely to quickly take a painkiller than we are to take a vitamin that may help us more in the long run, but it's not as, the presence of it isn't, it's not as urgent. We respond to urgency.
And we want quick results.
yeah, quick results. So talking about quick results, mindset changes. Can mindset changes bring quick results? When we're talking about stress, are you talking about how long do you have to notice something is do something different in order to notice a difference? Do you have any, can you give us some insights on any of these things? Or what are some simple things that can help us feel like, yeah, this is making a difference?
Yes, and I think, as is sometimes the case, like you're saying, it's there. We like the dramatic results. Medication is very apparent, and we know that it's working. Lifestyle changes is slower, and sometimes only in retrospect do we see the shift. So it's really nice to get a gauge in terms of where you are, how you're feeling in terms of energy, outlook, mood, and then keep checking back on that. But it's also important to recognize that, we can read about having less stress, about being resilient, but if we're not practicing before we're in the stressful situations, when we're already coming from that reflexive reaction, then it's almost impossible to bring those new habits in. So I really encourage people to get in the practice of taking a pause. And you can do this at any time, but especially in, only moderately stressful situations. Just pause in the middle of the conversation. You don't have to bring it to a halt, but get curious and consider where your reaction is coming from. Is it directly related to this exchange, or is it calling back on something else? And you can use the same thing in the other person. What has them triggered in this moment? Is it actually relevant, or could it be drawing back on something from them too? And as you explore this, your brain really starts to embrace this quality, and it brings you out of that reflexive reaction, which I know you're so intimately acquainted with. I love how you illustrate this in your book. And it gives us that opportunity to choose our reaction and to begin to choose our mood. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that people who are depressed can choose to be happy, but I do believe that we can choose which emotions we want to call in. And as we keep on doing that, our brain recognizes that that's a comfortable place to be. It's more comfortable than being on alert and worried and bringing in the fear, because that's really where our biology is wired. We're wired to learn from stress, and that's why those lessons are so deeply imprinted.
And part of my understanding is that when we are able to, and it as you say, part of it is just kind of noticing, having it pointed out, and then noticing, and then the brain often really does start to notice these things even more. But when we can take that little bit of a step back and observe, even as you said, to notice whether or not it's something that I'm feeling that way because of what's happening now, or whether it's a triggered event from some part of my past, and it's got nothing to do with this person, but it has everything to do with that other, I won't say what, that deserved to be clobbered some time back. But even just noticing that creates an observer status in us, and that's an empowering thing to be able to observe ourselves as well as observe others. So do you give people like little tips and tricks for how to do that, or
Yeah, practicing the pause in the moment is one. And if that's difficult to call back to mind, the practice of mindfulness is powerful, because it really helps us recognize that we are not defined by our thoughts, and that we don't have to engage in every thought that comes across our radar. So the more we can practice that, just awareness without feeling called to take action. And it only takes a minute or two a day starting out. A lot of people think, I don't have time to meditate. With this perception, you have to have a space and 30 to 40 minutes or an hour for it to really make an impact. But if you start out with a minute or two a day, and I need to set a reminder because I get all caught up in the work that I'm doing or life as it's happening. But that is the practice that then when you're in the moment, you have that perspective to bring into it and say, oh, wow, look at how angry I just got. I was feeling totally fine a minute ago. So where did that come from? But yeah, as I'm saying, it takes that groundwork so that you have that perspective when you're in the
Yeah, just as you were saying that, it made me think of this, how so many times when we're observing somebody else, we have lots of advice for them. And then the next second, we're doing exactly what we were recommending that the other person not do. So it's that being able to step back and have that space to give ourselves the advice. I mean, I guess that's a little bit of what's going on, then that's empowering, as you say. That empowers a person to have that, build a little bit of muscle in their lives that feels good, right?
Exactly. Because you can really see how situations start changing, how the outcome starts changing, because you're not in that reactive mode and they're not responding to what you might not have intended to express, right? And things quickly spiral up.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to get that perspective. But you're also making me think, so I'll just take a short moment to say, it also helps to have the perspective when we're talking about, how we observe other people, and it's easy for us to see what they could be doing differently, or we tend to have that inner critic that comes in and tells us what we've done wrong or should have done differently, and that can really wear away and wear down our confidence, but also kind of have us triggered as well. And I encourage people to, when it comes to that inner critic, not try to mute it. Just like you can't, put a lid on emotions, they really need to be understood and accepted. The more we try not to recognize emotions, the more they tend to come back later. The more we try to mute that inner critic, the louder it gets. And when you can kind of develop a relationship, if you will, we talk to ourselves all the time anyway, but recognize that it's coming from a place of protection, that it's coming from those lessons of stress or previous experience, and it's trying to, protect you from being hurt, and say, okay, I've got that, and I'm going to keep on moving this way. I'm not going to close myself off or retreat or defend myself. Thanks for that awareness, but I'm going to stay engaged in this moment and not get reactive.
I just had a bit of a funny thought, and I don't know whether it's useful at all or not. But as you were talking about that inner critic, and that just trying to mute it just wants to speak louder. I mean, that just sounds to me like me. If I feel like I'm not being heard, I just get more insistent. So, and then you went on to mention how we do have this inner dialogue going on most of the time. So, there is, at least in some spheres of psychology, they look at subpersonalities. And so even there, maybe we have to have more respect for even those different parts of us and, inside, within ourselves. And if we can understand that, as you said, that inner critic is coming from a place of concern and caution, and rather than just saying, oh, shut up, you stupid inner critic. I mean, I don't appreciate that, but anyway, I don't know whether that's got anything to do with it, but that was just,
No, I agree. I think that's a wonderful point, because there's so much, as you say, of the way that we respond, and even the way, that we treat good friends. Sometimes we don't treat ourselves as well. And so it's good to take a different perspective sometimes and take a closer look at exactly that.
And understand where it's coming from. So, what's one of the things, as you have worked with this area of stress, and you've come to this from, as you said, quite a circuitous route. What surprised you about working in this area, and what do you enjoy about it?
What's really interesting for me and makes it a little bit difficult is that people resist or standing up and saying, yes, I'm having issues with stress. How can I help myself? We in our society still wear it as a badge of honor. How many things we've done in a day, whether or not we actually took lunch at the desk or got away, since the pandemic has kind of been affecting us. They noticed very early on a VPN company that monitors the login hours of their users. American workers went to 3 additional hours per day of work. And so we don't have these boundaries, and we tend to wear it as a badge of honor. I only got 4 hours of sleep last night because I'm under this deadline. Right. And so it's really making that pivot that's difficult. It's getting people to feel comfortable standing up and saying, this is an area where I need help. So it has been helpful given the current situation, and because managers are recognizing it in their teams as the stress goes up. Right. And the WHO actually revised their definition of burnout because, well, in my opinion, because it's reaching such a scale. They're estimating that in the US it's costing employers $125 billion a year. Which is, okay, so the corporations are recognizing it and they're putting their resources behind it, which is tremendous. But unfortunately, there's faces behind all of those numbers. And they've got that ego and wanting to do good at their job and perhaps feeling insecure, in their place, especially with everyone working remotely. It's so hard to have the same office dynamics and feel as comfortable and confident when you're only seeing people on a video screen. When some people dive in on the microphone and others feel unheard because they're just not as quick. And so that's something that's really interesting, and I hope starts to shift as we continue this conversation, because it has become more front of mind. It was all over the news that stress brings down our immunity as we were looking for ways to stay healthy early in the pandemic. And yet there's still that we've got to make that connection between stress isn't good for us and it's worth putting some effort into making the shift.
Right, and what to do. I mean, because too many times we know that there's a problem, and we know that we should do something about it. We even might know that we could do something about it. But the question then becomes, well, what is it that would be good to do? What is it easy for me to do? How can I start and see a difference because of what I do? Can I afford it? Can I not afford it? I mean, even there it comes into looking at the costs of doing it or the costs of not doing it. Sometimes it's more important to look at what's the cost if I don't do something about it. So as what are some of the other insights that you have gained? I mean, clearly you're researching, you're watching what's going on, and is there any kind of a pivot to awareness that this is not just a kind of because mental health is, generally speaking, it doesn't bring with it, I guess I still always think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It doesn't always make me think of something that I want to be engaged with. I mean, it just has such negative feelings, and yet health and wellness and happiness and being in good shape, young and old, is so important to everybody. Are there ways that people are beginning to look at this differently and in a more constructive way, or is that still a struggle for most people?
I think it's coming online. And being in Southern California, I have the luxury of being surrounded by community and society where holistic health concepts are much more widely discussed. Yeah. And I really feel if I was back in, outside of Bloomington, Illinois, it's a college town. They're probably aware of it, but they've got better things to do. Right? Time is our precious commodity, and that's what's hard to get people to give up, because when you're talking about a more holistic practice, it takes that time and mental space to start developing these habits. So I hope so. And I see a lot of really exciting information coming out. So if people as you say, happiness is a much more fun topic than stress. And there's a lot more being shared now from the field of positive psychology.
Right.
They're really doing research and validating these practices and demonstrating how measurably people are happier after a pretty short period of time employing some pretty simple techniques. And so that's one of the things that I love to share with people. And just as I say, sometimes you have to look in the rearview mirror and say, oh, that didn't, bother me the same way that it did before, or I feel more energetic when I wake up. I'm not dreading getting out of bed. And so those things I think are so helpful. And again, in the same regard, as research is starting to validate some of the most ancient practices like meditation, and we're seeing the power of mindfulness. And so that's really exciting because a lot of people like to wait. They want to keep the jury out until the science comes in. Right. And numbers can be painted any which way people want to validate an argument, but in general, more and more evidence is coming in to support the value of these practices.
Right. I mean, even a couple of years ago, I interviewed Ellen Langer on mindfulness, and she's at Harvard and has done a lot of research, and there is data out there. It's not the data, the research that everybody jumps on so quickly, but there's very substantive research out there to show how much of a difference awareness and mindfulness can play in our lives. I mean, she did some. Anyway, I would recommend anybody who's got that interest to look at some of her work as well for some of the specific research. But she did it with. I think with older men, I think, and gave them experience of walking back into their lives as if it was back in their 40s, and the difference it made was absolutely measurable when they have that experience. And so when they're aware of what's going on and thinking the way they used to think and experiencing the way they used to think. So a lot of it is understanding how much our mindset really impacts, even physiologically, how healthy we are or not. But so exactly. I suspect that's an area of your work that you tell us a little bit more about any of the stuff that you utilize, make use of, or bring into your work with clients.
Well, one of my favorites is shared by Sean Aker, and I believe his book is called The Happiness Advantage. And he also has a really excellent TED Talk, very amusing, scientific, based on his research, TED Talk. And he has measured the results, and so this is something that I've been encouraging people to do as I'm working with them, that he calls wiring your brain for happiness. And there's a 21-day reset or challenge where you just take one of 5 different things and incorporate it for 21 days.
Right.
And it takes 5 minutes or less. But that, mindfulness or random acts of kindness, doing something for other people is another thing that's been demonstrated, one of the strongest generators of happiness. Movement is on the list too. And 5 to 10 minutes of movement a day, it doesn't have to be a really big commitment. Or writing your gratitudes, which everyone knows about, oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I should be doing my gratitudes, but, it doesn't make it on the to-do list. So I come back to my encouragement to use reminders, find a day, time in the day that it's going to work for you to get obstacles out of the way. And commit to it for 21 days, because that was all it took for the people in their study to have measurable changes. And, it takes something less than 70 times for something to become a habit. So run the challenge for a couple of times, and it becomes easier, to be one less thing we have to work to integrate, because time is such a precious commodity, and our attention is called in so many different directions. Right. So I really try to put as much on autopilot as I can. And then just as you're saying that the power of perspective is tremendous. And just the feeling, that feeling of having control over our emotions and our outlook. Kelly McGonigal has another great TED Talk that sums up some of her research where they've measured the way that people respond to stress. And it's all in the framing. And if they don't do much with the framing and, in that stressful situation, the physical anticipation and response to that stress is measurable and detrimental. And we know that stress leads to cardiovascular disease, also diabetes, can lay the foundation for cancer, autoimmune disease, so many other things. 60% of the population has chronic diseases right now.
Right.
Right? And there's no single solution. There's no brilliant cure, but we can start taking some of this out of the way so we stop paving the way to that. And then instead, when we change our framing and say, instead of stress being something that is attacking us, it's our opportunity to overcome, to ace this challenge, to reach a reward. Physically, we respond completely differently. And that's really the magic, being able to change the way that we step into stress. In addition to giving ourselves that time to recover, so that our body isn't always working at max capacity, because that's when people really hit burnout and have those chronic diseases come up.
Yeah, and it occurs to me, one of the things that is a factor, especially, thinking about texts, and I often think about texts for various reasons, but including, I've got a few of them in my family, that a key, a really important thing to them is performance. And all we have to do is look into the more typical professional sports realms and see that anybody who's a high performer tends to have somebody who's helping keep them accountable, keep an eye on them, providing them insights and perspectives that they don't have themselves. And I guess this is the whole thing of coming back around to accountability, because it's one thing to read a book. It's another thing to listen to a TED Talk for a few minutes. It's another thing to say, yes, I'll set it in my timer, and then when it pops up, I just go, eh. But having somebody that really is concerned about you, and I guess I'm coming back around to this because I've seen it so many times for people that I've worked with over the years. I've ended up coaching and doing this, that, and the other thing myself, and even if it's just out of concern for somebody, but unless people have really somebody with them who is paying attention to their situation and helping them find their way through the woods, it can be difficult. So I guess that's one of the benefits of working, like the kind of work that you do, is that you provide people that kind of support, because I know people, as you say, it's hard for people to say, I need help. But if they, if people see it, if people see it more along the lines of like, this is performance, and it is normal for people who are wanting to perform optimally to have another set of eyes on what you're doing.
Yes. And I think that's the perfect way to frame it. In order to optimize our performance and response, it's so helpful to work with a coach. And there are so many coaches in different niches and areas of expertise. And that's something that I love to do, is provide that accountability. And you can also find that in a coworker who might have a similar goal, or a family member who knows you. It's important to have somebody, when it comes to that accountability, who understands what you respond well to.
Right.
So that, you're not showing up because, their accountability method might be a little more harsh than you want, right? So you start steering clear.
I know you're my friend, but I don't want that kind of a friend.
Right. I'm not going to tell you what I didn't do this week. I'll tell you what you want to hear. And that doesn't get us where we need to go.
Right.
So absolutely. Accountability is tremendous, because just as you said, we can listen to the podcast, take in the news bites, hear it, and it's really interesting. And then life comes back up and gets in the way, and there's so many demands. So it really helps to have something that keeps you coming back to it.
Right. I mean, that's I think it's increasingly moving also into again, I'm coming back into the tech world, but I know a lot of the tech companies are actually allocating, employee funds to working with some kind of a coach, or, and it could be, I mean, it's totally up to the employee to choose how they want to use it. But that kind of concept of getting coaching, even in business or in life or in health and wellness, is becoming much more common or accepted or seen to be valuable. And I suspect it'll only keep going if in fact there is a payoff. There's got to be some kind of return on the investment for corporations, otherwise they won't keep doing that kind of thing. But yeah, it's good to see. So when as you're working on stress and this, I guess I'm thinking, and many times, family members can't always speak to other family members in terms of the work that they do, and so that's not exactly what I mean. You can't always advise other family members, but in terms of being concerned about the family and the community, what are some things that you recommend that can be done even at the within families to help address some of these kinds of issues? Because it's not just the family, but this kind of ties in work-life balance and family and yeah, there are just so many factors in our lives. We can get blurred about how to deal with all of this. But what are some thoughts that you have, or recommendations for families or work-life balance?
Yes, because that's really, unfortunately, we go to work, we're very mindful of our career and wanting to perform well and advance and have success. And so that's not where we break down, but where things start to fall apart a little faster is when we're home and we've lost all of our patience. We've used up all of our nice, and then it starts to land on the people that we love the most, or they're the ones who get, not as much of our time and attention because you're so focused on excelling at work. And so I think it's really important to be able to have a conversation or maintain within the relationship, not limited to only one conversation, but an opportunity to be honest. And it's not easy, but to embrace the vulnerability of saying, this is how I'm feeling. And so instead of it coming up in a conversation where you end up, snapping back at someone when you don't mean to, when you recognize you're getting spread too thin, you have to start laying the foundation, start having the conversation. I need a little more support here, or I need a little more space here. And it's hard for us to have the perspective sometimes to ask for what we need.
Right.
But as with all things, with practice, when you can have frame that conversation with your significant other or with the kids who are clamoring for attention because they just don't get enough of you, or especially if they're doing schoolwork, 3 feet away while you're trying to focus on work, interrupting one more Zoom meeting. So finding ways to have that conversation, to recognize what your needs are. And again, just as you were saying before, the perspective of someone else helping you recognize where you need more support might be necessary in order for you to find the way to have that conversation, or to recognize what you can start asking for more support. And on the other side of it, when you recognize your spouse is stressed out and there's not enough to go around, it's a very difficult conversation to have, because as we've talked about, people get defensive. We're performance oriented. We're trying to be the best at all things. And now I'm failing you. Like, I'm doing my best not to fail at work. And this is where things are falling apart. So it can be a difficult conversation to have. And I think if people recognize that at home, there's struggle there, then again, that's an opportunity where perhaps a moderator can really be valuable in helping to frame that so that conversation can continue to happen.
Well, just hearing you describe all of those scenarios, I'm going, oh my God, where was Susie when I was in the... I needed a Susie when I was in the middle of traveling around the world. I'd come home, I'd have to do the shopping, the cooking, the laundry, take care of the kids, try to be present with my husband, and I was very, very bad. I'd run out of, as you said, out of my nice. And I was very bad at then having those conversations with my family. And that stressed them out. It stressed me out like crazy. So yeah, I can see how even just half an hour every now and then with a somebody, with a Susie, would... Everybody needs a Susie. I would have to say, in retrospect, oh my God, it's amazing that I've, our marriage has survived, and the kids are great, and we love them dearly, and all of those sorts of wonderful things. But yeah, there were times when, boy, did I feel stretched like thin.
Yes. And we've got this idea, we're striving for work-life balance. And I love that people are coming out and saying balance is an illusion. We can aspire to balance, we can continue working in that direction, but that's not one more way in which we should be harsh with ourselves and saying, I just can't get to balance. It's a moving target.
Absolutely. It's like trying to say, I want the ocean to stop moving. Fat chance.
No.
Just not going to happen. But you're still constantly working to keep your balance. I mean, that's just a constant work too. And learning to enjoy that is a challenge, but it is fun. Yeah.
It is. We can learn to embrace some of those things. And I think that goes back to how we frame it.
Right.
When we are harsh with ourselves, saying, I didn't ace that situation, I didn't get that conversation exactly right. Then we're already setting ourselves up for, I'm going to fail again.
Yeah, it's a judgment rather than forward-looking and seeing it as, well, now I just discovered another way that doesn't really work so well. This is great information, feedback.
Exactly. They have their human moments. I have my human moments too.
Yep, I am human. Yeah. So yeah, I love the way you really teased that out and showed how absolutely it these stressful moments and it really do play out profoundly in our in our relationships, and especially with those that we love and care about the most. And yeah, having a little assistance at times can be a wonderful gift.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah, I told you I was going to ask you this question, and I don't know whether you prepared to answer the question, but I did say that in one sentence, what would you like people to take from this conversation? I mean, they hear conversations all day, but from this conversation about mindset and stress and yeah, today, where we are.
I'll try to keep it to one sentence, but I might carry on a little bit.
Well, start with one sentence and then go to two.
Yeah. I really want people to recognize how much power they have to change the way that life events affect them by choosing their response to stress. And I think it's that feeling of empowerment carries over into other areas. And it comes from building these little habits, like getting in the habit of just tuning into your breath for 2 minutes a day, reward yourself after 10 days in a row, go up to 5 minutes, those little wins. I'm a big advocate of little wins. And again, all of that starts getting your mind into looking for success, looking for good outcomes, and then you just keep finding them. We see what we're looking for.
So to some extent, what you're saying is never underestimate the power of the small?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Little changes add up to huge rewards.
Yeah. And the other thing I heard you say was you said celebrate by taking it to 5 minutes, or at least celebrate in some way. Celebrate the victory.
Celebrate. Yes. And that's a point that Sean Aker makes. We keep changing our definition of success.
Yeah.
We set a sales goal, and then that's great. Do better.
Yeah.
And he's a big advocate, and I'm really a proponent of not waiting until we get to the end game, to the big result to celebrate, but set milestones along the way and reward yourself. Choose in advance what you're going to do. Don't make it a setback or something to the other practices you're trying to cultivate to be healthier and happier. And get in the habit of rewarding yourself for good results and good work. And it'll be less drudge along the way.
I mean, the little celebrations, that just made me think of one of my favorite things to do. Sorry to talk about the stuff that I like to do, but I do enjoy playing some VR games, and one in particular, which is Beat Saber. Now, there's one thing I really, 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 really don't like about Beat Saber, is that when you crash, or you die in the course of not making it to the end, it says failed across the screen. I really wish they would put try again. But that aside, I just try to close my eyes. That aside, when I just beat my last score, I literally go, yes, and just the physical, even just that physical celebration. Yes, I mean, it's just such a natural thing to do when we celebrate. Nobody teaches a kid how to celebrate. You just raise your hands and go, yes. Even just to physically do authentic. That makes me feel good. So when I beat my old score, even if it's not the best in the world, I celebrate. Yeah. And it feels great. Yeah.
It does feel great. And I think that that's something else too. We tend to get in this mindset of healthy habits are no fun and I have to go exercise. Well, find something that is fun. If you don't like going to the gym or going for a run, put on some music you can't help but dance to for 10 minutes and do something that's fun. Yeah. And then it transforms your energy, your outlook, everything.
Yeah, and that's why I play that game, because it's music based, it's movement, and it's a game challenge. So of course I've got that part of me. So I put all of those things together, and I don't like to spend time on the down in the gym. That's just not my thing. But playing a game, now there you go. So I found my happy spot for exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, before, we're getting through to close to the end of our time, but what do you do? What is your work? What do you do? I mean, what is your work, Susi?
So the way that I work with people is I work with people one-on-one. And just see where they are. As I said earlier on in the conversation, I mentioned environmental stress. I pay a lot of attention to where we can take away what we don't need to carry. So physical, emotional, and environmentally, where stress can be coming in. And so that's very personal. And so that's easiest done one-on-one. And again, with that accountability component, right? So that people aren't getting a whole list of things and there's overwhelm and never mind.
Yeah. Irrelevant stuff. Yeah. You filter all of that out very quickly. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm also putting the pieces together and finalizing a group program, because I think we also talked about earlier, community is so important.
Right.
And it's hard for people sometimes to raise their hand and say, I need help in this. But if we can get to a place where you can be in a community of people who are recognizing they're ready to make this shift and be more empowered with stress. So that is something that I've got going on. And then ultimately, I will be having a membership so it can be ongoing and kind of on drip. Like I was saying with the reminders, you can choose where you are and what serves you, and it keeps coming in. There's new material, so it stays fresh. And we can keep being engaged and encouraged to make the little changes so that, making new habits doesn't have to be such a task.
Right. And many times just having a community who have a common interest. I mean, that's why we form clubs and associations, and this is just very human. But it just makes sense, because also I know that in lots of situations, you hear another person telling their story, what they've been doing, what they're challenged by, and you go, oh, yeah, I've got that too, but they haven't even formulated it that way. So there's always that very interesting learning from, we're simians, we're monkeys, monkey see, monkey do. We learn from one another, and we watch and we observe, and that's one of the ways that. Sorry, I don't mean to reduce everybody to a monkey, but.
Well, if we don't do the work, that's where we're coming from. So.
There you go. But yeah, I think that your point about people to, as quickly as possible, to recognize the power that we do have over our lives, that if we don't explore that, we don't discover it, and then we just feel like we're battered from here to there, and we're just a victim of our circumstance. But as we do develop that capacity and that space between the incoming stimulus of our lives, whatever it might be, and our capacity to take a breath and then to respond, that's where a lot of the potence, the power, even just satisfaction within our own lives comes in my experience. Yeah. I mean, that's just stuff that I seem to notice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, I think it's been wonderful to explore this with you, to talk this through. I guess even the things that I take away from this are just being able to have these kinds of conversations that are knowledgeable with somebody who can help provide perspective can be extremely powerful for actually relationships. And relationships are the kind of the meat and potatoes, if you're a meat and potatoes person. I say that because my husband's meat and potatoes guy. In their lives. It's such an essential. Relationships are so fundamental to who we are, and being able to have ways to just upgrade and not for our relationships to deteriorate even over the years is just so important. And so thank you for doing this work. Thank you for that insight on. I really did appreciate you raising the issues that I look back on and think, oh my God, why didn't I do something? But it's an important perspective, because I know that in those moments, life is so busy. It's like you feel like the guy. What was it? I think it was a Covey story. He told the story about the lumberjack who was up the tree sawing away, cutting the tree down, and he knew that his saw wasn't sharp, and it was taking him. He was putting so much effort into it, but it just was not working because the saw was not sharp. And somebody said, "Why don't you stop and sharpen the saw?" And he said, "But then I wouldn't be cutting the tree down." But so somewhere in there in our lives, it would make sense for us to actually take those few moments and sharpen our saw.
Yes.
And make a difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that perspective is hard to get when we are in the thick of it, and things are coming at the rate at which they do. Definitely. Yeah. And so that's why with the material that I shared on the page,
tell us about that.
That I shared is a stress assessment.
Yeah, tell us about that. My apologies there. Yeah, because Susi's got something for anybody who came on who's interested. If you go to the Exceptional TV, there's a link through to her materials. So tell us about it, Susi.
Absolutely. So the stress assessment is one of the first tools that I use when I work with anybody or have a conversation, which there's also a link to do that as well. Because 30 minutes to get clarity is priceless, and it's something that I'm happy to share. So the stress assessment lets you just rate yourself on a really quick table to get a bird's eye view of what little habits you might just be tolerating or, in the practice of without recognizing, and shine some light on where stress can be coming in. So I love that tool to kind of get an idea of little things that you might start upgrading. And then I also share 8 tips for busy leaders and entrepreneurs. It's something that I created for a program I just shared recently. And so it's a really nice, just kind of comprehensive, kind of laying the foundation for resilience in terms of better health habits, movement, like I was talking about before, upgrading your sleep, which is one of the top complaints that I hear people struggling with. And so I just wanted to share those tools as well.
Well, thank you. Anyway, that link is right below probably where people are watching now. And if you, even with the replay later on, the link will be right below. So I would strongly urge you to take Susi up on. Everybody needs a Susi. I would strongly urge you to take her up on getting that assessment and those 8 points. And thank you very much for providing that for our listeners, Susi. I really appreciate that, and I've really enjoyed our time chatting and digging into some of the stuff and being a little bit playful here and there, but really appreciated you taking the time to spend time with us today. And hopefully, a few people's lives will be touched, because they could be the critical people for what happens in our world in the coming days and years. So our world is increasingly leveraged by technology, and technology of all kinds, and so there are so many more unknowns these days than what there used to be. So having that capacity and building that resilience is really, really important, because stuff is going to happen in life. So Susi, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say as we close out, other than
Yeah, I would just add to that too. Currently where we are in 2020, people keep looking for when are we going to get back to normal. And I, instead of wishing for the way things have been, I think that this is really an opportunity to define our new normal. And so moving forward, you get to choose where your priorities are and your boundaries are, so you can have healthier boundaries and take care of yourself and the people that you love. So
thank you, Susi.
On all counts.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'd like to invite everybody to come back and join us at the same time next week, Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Pacific. We have all different kinds of really fascinating people come on and talk about all different kinds of aspects of their lives that make a difference, because we're focused here on making our world a better place, as even as those good troublemakers like John Lewis, who have put so many years of their life into making the world a better place. And it doesn't always go forward smoothly, but it's really critical that we do have our thought leaders, our change leaders, and those who are working hard to make our lives better for everybody. Thank you, Susi, for all that you do. Take care.
Thank you.
We look forward
Thanks so
to
much.
seeing everybody again next week.
Thank you.